I'm pleased to introduce the Women's March organizers to politics and prose. Thanks to the work of this team, the Women's March on Washington, which took place on January 21st, 2017, involved people marching not just here in the Capitol, but in all 50 states and in all 7 continents. In Together We Rise, the Women's March organizers recount the feelings of post-election despair. I was there too. Which quickly morphed into something bigger, a desire to stand up and fight for positive change. More importantly, the book shares the impact of the Women's March through personal stories, photographs, and essays written by organizers and participants. Though it is very much a behind-the-scenes look into an important event in modern history, its Now What section was the most inspirational for me, as it shows that the Women's March is a movement, not a moment. Now please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Maria Teresa, President and CEO of Voto Latino.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight, and thank you so much for you coming over after hours. I know that everybody has valuable time, and the fact that you're here to dedicate your thoughts and your encouragement is something that we really value. I have to say that I could not be more thrilled to be here because I am sitting on a panel. Oh, sure. But I will be sitting down. Just FYI, so stand on your tippy toes. I have to share that I cannot be more honored and privileged to stand here in front of the women that have really been folks that I've known for, in some cases, for a long time, but women that have really stepped out of the shadows and lifted voices, not just here in the United States, but as the person that introduced us worldwide. And I think it's talking about a moment, movement, and progress. So just very quickly, I want to introduce the panelists tonight. Bob Bland, National Co-Chair. Please raise your hand. Janae Ingram, Head of Logistics. Melanie Campbell, President of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. And Mia Ives Rubley, founder of the Disability Caucus. So just a little bit about a rundown. We're going to have a conversation. Then we're going to bring in other folks that organized here locally as well, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So thank you. And I will be sitting down, so if you can't hear me, we'll... So, Bob, I want to talk a little bit about how, first of all, how it came into being. I think a lot of folks understand the backstory, but folks don't really understand the impetus behind the intersectionality and how you were able to move that forward, and what opportunities the movement saw with that, and why you all thought that that was so critical in this moment.
Well, as one of the co-founders of the march, who essentially on the day of the election, when we were first seeing the results come in, my daughter Penny, right there, who was at that time, she was 5, said, "Mama, tell Hillary Clinton I'm sorry." And I was like, "Why, baby?" You know, it's like 7 o'clock at night. And she's like, "Because Hillary has 3 and Donald Trump has 21. And she could see what was happening. I was the one who was in denial. And so I would say that that's kind of indicative of the most white women in this country are, and white people in general, are obliviousness to the systemic oppression and the systemic racism, the systemic sexism, xenophobia, all of that was going on this whole time. We didn't realize that someone like Donald Trump could actually have a following that would catapult him into the White House. And I know. And so it was something where that was the veil finally being pulled off of our eyes. So
pull my eyes off.
Shh. I was one of the original organizers of the Facebook page. I had my own march that I had a following of 3,000 nasty women who
proud nasty women
who enraged nasty women on the day after the election, despondent nasty women who were like, "Bob, what are we gonna do?" Mm-hmm. And you know, at that time I said, you know, we should march on Washington on Inauguration weekend. And little did I know that across the world in Hawaii, there was a woman actually pretty similar to myself, first-time activist, never organized anything before, who was equally despondent and enraged and knew that we had to do something. And so by the magic of the internet, we met within 2 hours of finding out about each other's events. But I think it's really important to understand that even for us as a confirmed not woke people at that point in our organizing, we definitively did not want this to be just about an anti-Trump backlash. We wanted it to be about uplifting all the beautiful things about our people and about the diversity of America and about women and the way that we lead in our communities and the unity that we could all have together, the democracy, the America that has not yet been made. However, we were going about it the wrong way because when we noticed there was no intentionality around who was organizing the march, it was very much an organic, viral thing where within 48 hours, we, through the Facebook page, we had seen that people were like, you cannot say that you have unity without centering the people that you're speaking of in leadership. And that was so simple, so obvious, but yet also so profound for those of us who have unacknowledged, skated on our white privilege our entire lives, to finally have to come to face with that, acknowledge it, and then make a change and say, you know what, we weren't there before. And we can never take that back. And we'll always remember that we have spent our whole lives working on our own issues, but not yours. But here we are now, and I was so lucky to get a phone call and to be able to meet Tamika Mallory, Linda Sarsour, and Carmen Perez about 72 hours into the march planning, because they're not only are they dedicated civil rights activists who had planned things like this before, but seeing the shift for them, you know, and seeing them say, you know what, I shouldn't have to deal with you problematic white ladies, but this is too big an opportunity for us to not come together. And that was where the intersectionality began with the Women's March.
But I also think it speaks testament to the need to listen to voices.
Yes.
And the need to actually open those doors and actually make room at the table.
Yeah,
so
that's the best thing.
It's just like, yes.
The best way that you know, a lot of women to this day, white women, ask me, is there, you know, it's actually almost comical question, is there space for me in this movement? And the best way for white women to exist in leadership in an intersectional movement like this is in the capacity of holding the doors open, of holding space to and constantly insisting on that centering of our most marginalized communities in leadership, in strategy. It's not just about talk, it has to be about action. And it's not just about marching, it has to be an everyday practice.
Right, and I think that, I mean, I was lucky enough to join you guys in Vegas, you ladies, in Vegas this past weekend. And I think that what struck me the most was the breadth of conversation and topics, and recognizing that while everything may not have been met and you gave room to address. And I think that is a step to larger conversations and larger opportunities. And so with that, Melanie, I want to talk to you a little bit about this idea that the Women's March went across the globe. It was a call to action for all women to stand up and to stand together. How does the Women's March feed into the broader movement?
That's not what I wrote about.
You're the only person I didn't ask to look at the question, too. I checked beforehand.
I think the practical reality is that it was a global response. Mm-hmm. And it was truly a global response to what had just happened, and a shock, right? And that happened. That's the visual of that. I think to get to, you know, why this was important for me was really, it was about sisterhood. It was about the fact that Tamika Mallory reached out to me. Janae reached out to me. I didn't know Bob yet, right? And my initial response was, hell no. No,
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
Why?
I'm mad at nobody.
Why?
Well, I was actually angry. Not lying.
Yeah.
I was angry. Very angry. Black women had voted the way we did. We knew. We global beat, drum beat, African drum beat, if you want to say. We knew because, a child of the South, which is what I am, understanding the depth of racism that was still existing and seeing it throughout the election cycle and being able to, and I have several sisters who were here who were a part of that, really trying to stand on our head to say the sky is falling.
Yep.
Yeah.
And how that wasn't responded to. And once that vote went the way it did, and that black women carried it the way we did, and that we didn't just start doing that, and that reality, and having grown up in Florida, which good things happen, but a whole lot of stuff happens in Florida, right?
They're working
And
through
having
it.
been
They
on
see
the
the issue.
ground and knowing what was happening, once I got that call, I really didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to. I was straight up. It's a white women's march.
Yeah.
It's a guilt. Y'all feeling guilty?
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do about that. Y'all need to figure this out, right? That was a real honest response. But as we talked it through and understanding that the importance of supporting black women's leadership and people who I'd worked with, who I'd mentored,
mentored
we
a
mentor
lot.
each other,
Yeah.
right? Always, but understanding that intergenerational leadership and the role and the people whose shoulders I had stood on, like Dr. Dorothy Height and others, that it was my responsibility to support as best I could. And then there was the challenge of getting black women, because there was already the narrative you talked about, Bob.
Yeah.
The narrative was there,
Yeah, very,
and
very strong.
in some ways the narrative is still there a year later, right?
Totally.
But being able to try to focus on not just letting it be that day, but to build those relationships, to deal with the issues that are really front and center for black women and black women-led organizing. And we were in Detroit at the Lit convention, Follow Black Women. That's not a cliche. That's
you can't.
understanding that we carried the progressive movement. And we continue to carry the progressive movement. If you look at what happened in Virginia and New Jersey and Alabama, right? And being able to then see this march, I honestly still have a lot of mixed emotions about what we saw happen in 2017, and then seeing so many people out there again saying, so what is the shift? What is the change? If we're all living this nightmare, right?
Yeah.
And some people are cool with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. They keep right. Well, and I think and I think
didn't
that
answer your question.
Yeah, no. But I think but you touched upon, I think, a lot of issues that really hit the Latino community as well. It's like we saw it coming, right? This president started he launched his campaign on the backs of Latinos, so this was not a surprise.
Yeah, thank you. I was saying.
Thank you. And so I think that but those are still hard conversations to have, because we met so many people that were on the front lines trying to basically sound that bell, and then all of a sudden this blossomed, and saying, how can you marry the two? So I think that's completely, and I think for some folks they're still working through it, right? Like they're still working through it. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's still a reconciliation of specifically like the Clintons and the Bernies, right? And my sense is like, how do we actually move past that, because that's not the issue anymore, right? Like the institutions are at risk, our people are at risk. So how you were able to work through that, I think, is something that we could all learn from as well. And Janae, I have to say, I am such a fan. We have worked so closely together, and the work that you have done, full disclosure, we worked when she was working with Reverend Al, and when I found out that she was on the roster figuring out logistics, I'm like, they couldn't have not identified a better person. This is a woman that literally sadly after Eric Gardner was able to bring together close to 60,000 people in Washington, D.C., literally in less than 6 days. And
It's funny, I forgot about that.
how? Yeah, no, she's like so many under my belt, but it was,
in 6 days.
It was literally in 6 days, and there was questions around the solidarity of whether or not Black and Brown were going to come together on this conversation. There was questions whether or not people were going to have the hard conversation of profiling and whether people would show up in Washington, a city that is run by authority. And not only that, but you were able to get them on board, and you found a lot of folks actually participating, a lot of the cops participating in the march, because it hit so close to home. So so when I saw you on the roster that you were doing logistics, and we were like, can they get permits? I'm like, yes, they can get permits. Because there were conversations
I'm glad
on
that
that.
you were confident, because yeah, the whole permit situation was
tough. No, I was getting calls. So I'm like, no, she's doing fine. Well, so just some backstory for folks in the audience to appreciate. For a long time, I also know a friend of mine sits on the Park Service board, and she's like, they don't know if they have enough porta potties. They were trying to calculate porta potties because they didn't expect the crowd to show up that did. Yeah. And so those are all things that
sold them out, right?
Yeah,
we did. Yeah. We did. They didn't have any more to give us, but.
So on that, though, I do want to just switch a little bit. But in the past year, not only has it been groundbreaking for women through the Me Too movement to Time's Up, women are running for office at record numbers. 26,000 women have literally thrown their hat in the ring through Emily's List alone, not including Run for Something and go down the list. Women of color in particular were crucial in electoral victories from progressives last year. We're talking about, you mentioned Alabama, Virginia, New Jersey, Minnesota. How do you see these developments in the context of the Women's March?
So I think, for me, I think the Women's March was really the spark that lit the flame. Not that these things, specifically when we talk about Black women and our ability to continually show up and show out, Melanie does very important work around civic engagement, specifically in the Black community. She also leads the Black Women's Roundtable, and so she can attest better than anyone that that has been happening. I think even some acknowledgement of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, sexual harassment has been happening. Again, some of the sexual harassment law that we have is attributed to Black women. They were the three Black women were the first major cases that helped shape that law. But I think ultimately there's been a widening of space for people to feel like they have a voice. I saw someone that I knew from college, and she said to me, I had never participated in a march. I had never participated in any sort of demonstration, but I came to the Women's March, and I finally felt like my voice mattered. And so I think it was that for a lot of people, that they had never participated in any sort of rally or demonstration. They cared about issues. It wasn't about not caring. They cared, but they didn't feel like they in any way could make a difference. But when you see that 5 million people stood around the world with us together collectively, you realize each one of us has a purpose. We can lend our voice to the movement. We can lend our actions to the movement. And I think from there, you've seen a lot more people engaging in activism in ways that they probably never imagined themselves doing, whether it was people who showed up the weekend after the march. And I was in LA with Linda, Carmen, Tamika, Paula, who also is majorly responsible for us having this book, Paula Mendoza. And we were in LA, and it was when the first ban came. And we were distraught, we were crying, we were upset. And another woman that we know who's an activist in LA, she was doing an action at LAX, at Tom Bradley. And she invited us, we went. And I remember people coming up to us saying, last weekend was the first time I've done anything. And
How
now
is that for the case for the folks in this room? The last
first time
activists
coming
last year.
into the march.
Raise your hands high, be proud.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But a lot of people came up to us and said, last weekend was the first time I've ever marched. But thank you for providing the space for me to even know that this is something that I can be a part of. And so I think it's that. I think, we haven't necessarily, officially, I should say, engaged with some of the things that have been happening. But I think it is by far a byproduct of the fact that people saw what happened. They saw that there was wide-ranging support. And they felt like, okay, I can do this. I can either be an activist, I can run for office, because it's really up to us to make the change that we want to see. We can't, just continue to have the status quo. We have to see more people who embrace progressive policies run for office and win. And I think we've seen a demonstration of that last November, but there's more to come. There's more to do, which is partly why we launched Power to the Polls, and that, that was just this past weekend, which is crazy that we're at a year after the march. But overall, I think, giving people the space to have their voice heard, to speak truth to power, and just really know that they're not alone when they do that is really empowering.
No, and I think that one of the things that we learned, it was an observation from my team, was that it's a lot harder for many folks to march than to vote. Because you okay? So that basically it's a lot harder for folks to march than to vote, because you're basically becoming part of a testament. You're very physically out there exposing who you are, what you believe in a very public place, and people are going to hold you accountable. And so for you to give folks that courage to be able to do that in a safe space and say, this is actually the America I believe in, is not only something to be recognized, but the fact that the globe did it. It also demonstrates American leadership, that basically we have been there for folks and they were there for us, and we have to figure out how to maintain that. And I think that is powerful.
And I think I just want to mention that the fact that the majority of the folks who signed up for the March on Washington, who officially signed up, did so in the first 72 hours. And that was people saying, you know what? That was a breakthrough for a lot of people, that no more excuses. I'm not going to ask XYZ, like all the other people who were asking about the permit and this and that and that. They were, they probably didn't show up, But the fact that people said sight unseen, that the Amtrak lines were completely sold out within a few days after, that most of the planes were completely sold out within a few days. Hotels, we couldn't even find a hotel.
You could have stayed with me. But I knew that so Voto Latino, we helped with the sister marches, and we would literally get on phone calls, and there would be 3,000 people on phone calls. And it wasn't once, it was several times. And it was, it was literally hundreds of organizations coming in and just sharing best practices to make sure that it was effective. And that shows that there's something sparked. But I want to bring in Mia Ives Rubley into the conversation and talk a little bit more about the 1-year anniversary. So I was in Las Vegas, as I mentioned, as the official celebration of the Women's March this year. And the enthusiasm in Vegas and around marches across the country has not waned in the last 12 months. When women are emboldened to stand up and speak out, what takeaways do you draw from the march this past Sunday, and what does it mean for our country and for the movement that you represent as well?
I got involved with Women's March a little differently than other people. Disabled people aren't often talked about or seen as empowered people. We're often not included in progressive events, and when we are, it's usually a token sort of little gift, I guess, to our community. So when I saw the call about the Women's March, I think I saw it a day or two after the election. I started noticing a pattern of disabled people asking about accessibility concerns. And so I had no intention of working on a national stage. That was not my intention. But when I saw that there was a hole, I started talking to friends that had disabilities as well, and they were all interested in going to the march. And all of them, I heard from most of them saying, look, we're always excluded. And when we are included, it's usually not a total inclusion. And so we sort of created this disability caucus, and then I started basically emailing all the people on board at the national level. I was probably kind of a pest, But I sent a ton of emails for about a week and was finally able to because I know there were a ton of emails going to you all. Yeah. I did finally break through and got some responses. And, you know, I think the Women's March was sort of the first time that a progressive group was willing to sort of face the music in terms of disability issues. We worked pretty long and hard on the accessibility issues and the unity principles to try and make sure that we were included. And I think that actually helped open up the field for more progressive groups to start working on their accessibility issues through the year. And we saw, you know, a lot of progressive groups actually contacted me about working on their accessibility. So, you know, I think like everybody has been saying, it's provided a wider opening for minority groups that have not been heard from and have not been given a stage. And, you know, Las Vegas was another example of us working together to make sure that there was that accessibility was that we addressed accessibility and also had people talk about disability issues on stage, which is extremely important and part of the inclusion process. So my hope is that, you know, from Las Vegas, you know, we continue on in being inclusive and starting to work, you know, like Power to the Polls is all about doing actionable steps now. And I'm really hopeful for that part of sort of our next evolution of what we're doing and really addressing the issues around voting rights. So, yeah.
So I guess the Me Too movement provided the opportunity for folks to talk about Time's Up when it is related to the sexual harassment of housekeepers, farmers, and so forth. So it really, and people would say that it stemmed from here. Do you believe that this is a moment also for the disability movement to open it up larger for larger conversations and a better awareness so that we could actually implement the policies that you're discussing, make sure that there's more accessibility at the polls, so on and so forth? Do you see this as a moment?
I'm hopeful.
What needs to happen?
I think continuing to get more disabled people involved in leadership levels. I think understanding that disability affects every identity group there is, and understanding that we, the disability community, have power, and that we have talent that has not been tapped yet. And so my hope is that the work that the Disability Caucus has done and that ADAPT has done will show progressive groups exactly what they've been missing out on, you know, and really utilize us to the fullest potential and not just as tokens.
No. So are you also then creating a platform so the candidates are also held to that, whether it comes to their hiring, whether it comes to their placements for leadership?
Yes, yeah. That's definitely going to be part of.
My apologies. So
No.
yeah, so because I think that, and we find this oftentimes that, especially as people of color, we go into these places and oftentimes it's the check mark, but there's no power. And so the more that we could actually have this conversation of missing the blind spots oftentimes because we leave voters on the table. It happens all the time because you just do enough to get you over the hump, but that's not actual electoral enfranchisement. So it would be curious to see where the opportunities are and how you're thinking about it so that we can have broader conversations with those types of enfranchisement. So again, so it's not just the token, but it's actual empowerment, which is a completely different paradigm.
Yeah.
And I would just say that having the directly impacted people as the leaders and the ones determining the strategy and the solutions is the way forward on that, because Mia will never forget herself,
Right.
you know, and Janae will never forget herself. So it's something where, like, I even saw, and also you would never use yourself as a bargaining chip, like what we just saw with Dreamers and DACA recipients, where they were seen as just like, oh, it would be nice to have, you know, and watching Schumer, his speech, and then seeing how completely nonplussed McConnell was by the entire idea of, oh yeah, well maybe we'll have the conversation later. Like, it was clear that the Democrats had not used the political will that we had provided them when 4.2 million, that's the confirmed number, marched or participated in an event over the weekend. 4.2 million people across 700 events across the United States.
Right.
Much higher than even the last year.
Yeah, last year we had 5 million people march globally, and about 3 million march in the U.S. It's 4.2 million marching in the U.S.
Yeah. And I think that basically is also, and this is something that we took on. This was actually an example of what happens when you have leadership that does not reflect the country that they represent. Correct. And that vote would have been completely different had you actually had leadership in that actually knew what the consequences were at the local level.
And that's why we also have to take the movement vote. So this year, your vote is not just your vote. Right. It's your vote, and it's also a vote for the Dreamers. It's also a vote for everyone up here.
So with that, I want to be mindful. I want to introduce the other organizers. If you can stand up, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. So Ted Jackson, stand up. Disability and Logistics. Ayanta Summers, Logistical Support. Caitlin Ryan, National Volunteer Coordinator. Avery Jones, Vendor Logistics. Stacy Lee, Special Guest Logistics. And so I think I want to be mindful of folks, but if you guys could just basically share what was your best learning of working in coordination? They're still sorting that out.
Working with the Women's March was definitely an experience to enjoy and to get to know the home of Washington, D.C. a little bit more. Bob did mention about the hotel, and one of the biggest things with working in D.C., you have to find that right hotel for the right people. And the Watergate was sure enough that was for us.
I think it was the last one, too, right?
Yeah, and they were very helpful. They knew once we were coming in what they were expecting and how to treat Women's March as they came in. But it was definitely a learning experience working with the co-chairs and working with the organizers that were affiliated with what we were trying to do, and the impact we were trying to make at the end of the day was definitely the enjoyable part of the experience.
It was, of course, it was amazing, but the one thing that a lot of you all didn't see is that we were building up against an inauguration that was ending. We were out there at midnight, building a stage, trying to get CIA, FBI cars to move. It was, so the background of it was, it was hectic. It was a lot. I was mentally, physically, emotionally drained, when it was all over. We were all up probably a good 36 hours. I mean, we met before we even went out there. We literally had time to go take a shower and go outside and beg people to move their vehicles so we could build a stage and get ready. And people began showing up at 4 o'clock in the morning before we could even get done. So then we had to build against people coming. So it was, I've been in events for over 15, 20 years. It was an event that I've never experienced. A march is totally different than anything you could ever experience. And the one thing that I say to everyone is, when you're done marching, what are we going to do next? When you leave that march and we all come together in your communities, what are you doing? You don't necessarily have to run for office. I'm not one to run for office, but what I am doing is making sure our Black and brown kids get an education and get into college. So I think that's the one thing that we all really need to think about. What do we do when we're done marching as individuals?
Okay, I can add one nugget. Since we're going down the line, I think that contingency planning and communications were really critical. It's sort of easy to forget a year later how hectic it was, as Stacey said. But I mean, you all totally overwhelmed our wildest dreams and expectations. We were planning for 200,000 people initially, and so our plans, up until about 24 hours out, accounted for 200,000 people, right? So the day of, just making those decisions on the spot, realizing, our volunteer capacity was entirely maxed out, trying to understand, can we even march?
Yeah.
Right? I know a lot of people in the crowd expressed frustration. Oh, we're not marching. It sounds like we're not marching. We didn't know if it was safe to move, right? We were trying to understand what is it like out in the crowd? What can we do? So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that anyone here, hopefully, I don't think we need to at this time plan an event of that scale. Hopefully, things change in 2018 and we're not out in the street in, the millions in the coming years. But, if you ever are, communications the day of were absolutely critical and something that I think we could have invested more of our energy in.
For me, working with the team of the organizers, it was just remarkable to see the solidarity and how much everybody in that room worked together, how everybody, from my standpoint, put their egos aside and got the work done. I think that was one of the major things that came out of the march for me, because there were a lot of people involved in the march that were already superstars in their own right. And for them to be able to come together in 2 months, put 5 million people on the ground, and we pulled off such an amazing historic thing. It was an eye-opening experience, and it taught me that you have to lead and be inclusive. And Bob and Janae really taught me a lot about, just how they taught me a lot about how to be graceful in times of stress. That's one of the biggest things that I learned.
I got that from you.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that you can never have enough porta-johns.
Never.
Even when Madonna wants to use one, which happened backstage. But the other thing was, I think I came out of it with a lot of lessons learned. There were opportunities for us to learn from one another. There were opportunities the day of for decision making. But the biggest thing I learned was just from watching Janae navigate with the local authorities and the permitting process, and learning when not to say anything and when to be quiet. That was the biggest lesson I learned. I'd done events for years, but I really had learned that from Janae, because we were seeing things from behind the scenes, and we had this head count, and it was going up. And Janae was like, "We have 200,000 people. Don't you dare say that we have any more than that." And then when the head count went to 675, she goes, "I'm going to tell them 400,000, and don't you dare say anything else." And it was getting like, "Oh my God, this is getting big." Nope, no, it isn't. Don't say anything. And Janae really taught our logistics team. She included us. We were always included. We were on those MPD calls. We were on those calls with the authorities. But letting her do the talking, and then waiting till the call was done, and then connecting with her and figuring out, we'll figure this out later, but we're doing this.
It's done.
It's done. So the thing with the numbers is, and I've said this before, I don't even remember where we were just talking, but it's Facebook, so you never know. Like, people say they're going to show up, but it's easy to say on Facebook you're going to show up. So it was like, okay, 675,000 people are saying they're coming. I don't think all those people are coming. Surprise me, right?
Well, when we knew there was 8,000, so Operation Headcount, which actually made it on the Rachel Maddow show. It's a Google form. And we found out through that was done by Mrinalini, who's now one of our field directors. And she found that 8,000 buses that we knew of were being mobilized to the march.
It was, and I think people don't understand. People don't understand, like, to even figure out where buses are going to park. Like, there's not enough space in DC for buses to actually navigate. And so, yeah, it's when I think about the march that you just talked about, like planning that in 7 days was a feat.
You gave yourself a day. It was 6.
Yeah. Like, okay, yeah, exactly. It was like, okay, that was a feat, but this was on a whole other magnitude. And yes, it was planned in 2 months, but we also had 4 major holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas, the New Year, and then MLK. Yeah,
and
Bob had a baby.
Was pregnant.
Like a week in, a week in, 9 days in. Yeah. So there was all of that happening.
It's in the book.
Yeah, we literally gave up. Yeah, buy the book. It's all in there. But we literally gave up so much of and sacrificed so much of our time and ourselves in order to do this. Our health, I ended up with the flu after this, but it was all for a great reason. And now we look back and it's like I know I can't believe sometimes I pinch myself like, wow, I really.
Yeah, you did that.
Like, that thing?
So should we open up to? So
And now we have this family of organizers, thousands all across the nation, but also our core national organizing team that most of us never knew each other before this.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine our lives without each other, right?
We're connected forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's the perfect place to open it up for conversations. So there is a microphone right there next to the gentleman. If you can just state your name and question, that would be great.
My name's George Ripley. You're a massive political force now, and that's wonderful. I'm wondering if you have within your organization worked on a way to enable that force to be felt in every district. There are a lot of, as you know, a lot of new people running. I have a friend in New York City who's running, and for his U.S. Senate or House seat, young fella, and he would like to connect with the people in his district that you have found a home for, or have found a home with you. Is there a way that people running all across in districts all across the country can connect with the women in their district who have found a home with you?
That's a great.
So that's a great question. Ted, do you want to talk about? Well, first I'll say that we had 10 actions over 100 days of Trump's administration. So let's be clear. After January 21st, we took 1 day to eat brunch, do some interviews, and then we were back at it. Yeah. And so we have never stopped since January 21st. So a lot of people ask about whether this march was just a moment or if it'll be a movement. Movement's going. There's the train left the station a long time ago. You're welcome on it at any time. And one of the ways that we helped organize people was through these micro-local groups called huddles that we organized as our second. And so as a result of that action, we ended up with 5,500 huddles across the nation. I remember seeing in articles with the Washington Post, several of our huddles in South Virginia being credited with mobilizing voters to the polls in their location in the state during those big wins that we saw. Penny, this is like a real event. You're actually here. Come on. But moving forward, we also we have accessible entry points at all times. So if you get on our newsletter, on our mailing list, you'll find out information about our new campaign, Power to the Polls. And I'm going to let Ted Jackson take it away with some information on that.
So we have a really wonderful group of really strong women who are leading this Power to the Polls effort on a national level, and one sister guy. And we work on a political engagement team, and I think, one of the things that's important for us is that we take this energy and we make impact electorally. And so we're, in Las Vegas this past weekend, we launched a voter registration campaign which we'll be working on actively over the course of the year. We registered over 7,000 people to vote in the last 4 or 5 days. Tamika Mallory has set a goal of 1 million voter registrations in front of us, so we're being aggressive. And in the second half of the year, we will take that data, that information, what we've built up, and turn it into a GOTV campaign through the huddles and the chapters that were set up. And phone banks, door knocking, all of that sort of stuff. There is a component on endorsement and endorsing women candidates as a part of this, and a strategy to hit at least 10 really important states. We've announced 3 of them, so we just did Nevada, we're going to Texas next, and then Ohio and Pennsylvania. And then we have 7 more to announce, but we're making sure that our chapters are in agreement. And we'll do different things in each of these states. Some of them might be a concert, some of them might be a rally like we just did, some of them might be a 5,000 person door knocking canvas. But whatever we do is meaningful for and intentional for turning out vote on the ground for women candidates, and all under this umbrella of being the group, because there's a lot of groups that are pushing out voters for women candidates and supporting them, but we specifically want to address the 53% of white women who voted for Donald Trump in a daring discussion in that GOTV process to try and move some of them over to vote a different way this time.
And the training that we're going to be doing for that, which was at the convention, our women's convention in October, we had an unprecedented amount, I'd say hundreds of white women outside the door waiting to get into this confronting white womanhood training that we were doing.
We had to do it twice.
Which
wasn't originally planned, but.
Yeah, so we are, not only are we planning on taking that on tour to the 10 states and doing them in person, but also creating webinars so we can all get a little more woke and more committed, more unapologetically committed to anti-racism. And I think 2018 is the year for you to stop being an ally and start being an accomplice. Start really putting yourself on the line. Start, like Tamika said in at our Power of the Polls kickoff in Las Vegas, it is your job to get uninvited from Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the other holidays this year, because lives are at stake. So 2018 is your year.
Perfect. Next question.
Hi, I wondered if you could talk about how the original march went from being a national event to an international event. How did it expand to other countries and just spring up all over the world?
That was very intentional. We had
No, it wasn't at all. Okay.
Good. Well, I thought.
Oh my God, I don't know.
We
yeah, it was viral.
It definitely was. It definitely was viral. I think there was a moment where I remember. And this was very early on, we learned that people were planning marches in various cities. And we were like, no, tell everyone to come to D.C. We want everyone in D.C. But what we realized is that there was a moment where we were like, okay, that's actually powerful. That's awesome. If we can get people to march in these various cities. And so some of us, some of the people who had originally been part of the organizing for the DC March sort of started focusing on the sister marches, and Breanne Butler and Evie Harmon and even Bob, I think you were somewhat involved in making sure that these sister marches and that the marches in the states and then marches in various countries were actually going to happen. And so that was the intentionality. Once we realized that we weren't going to stop people from marching. If they weren't coming to DC, we thought, okay, they can actually have impact right where they are. They don't have to come to DC to have impact. And so it was a little bit of that.
And I think the intentionality into that you must be talking about is around making sure that they knew about the unity principles and that and this is still something we're working through. I'm sure you saw it in this weekend in Philadelphia and in Cincinnati and in certain marches. We are still working through breaking through to people that you can't just say what you stand for. You have to show people what you stand for, and then you have to center their voices, not just on stage, but in the organizing process and in the leadership. We're still working on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I will say about that is that this is new. This is a new idea. Feminism, traditional feminism, has always been very white women centered. And this is a new thing that we try to do, to put the voices of the most marginalized communities at the center of the table, at the center of leadership, at the center of the discussion. And so there are going to be times when we get it wrong. There are going to be, and we, I mean collectively we, not we Women's March, we everyone. Like, we are going to get it wrong. It's a hard thing for people to adapt. And when Bob talked about being uninvited to like holidays, that came from a very real place. When Betty Shelby was acquitted of murdering Terrence Crutcher, the Oklahoma police officer who said she feared for her life from a man who was walking away from her, I remember Bob saying, this cannot happen. Like, we're hiding behind white womanhood. Yeah. And Tamika and Carmen and Linda and I were like, that's not our discussion to have. We can't have that discussion in a way that's meaningful. We, as women of color, have been asking for white women to stand up for us. White women have to talk to each other, which is why the Confronting White Womanhood panel is so important, because it's not Black women or Latina women or anyone else talking to white women. It's white women talking to each other and saying, here's how we have benefited, and here's what that looks like, and here's how we can break it down. And so I think it's been very powerful to see that sort of happening. And I don't even know how this came from the question, but in any case, we're here. So yeah.
But I think the spaces that you're creating. No, but to talk. I think the spaces that you're creating by creating that is you're creating safe spaces so that people can have honest conversations without judgment. And I think that our political discourse right now, that if you actually feel uncomfortable with the changing demographics and you can't talk about it or say it out loud, and the moment you do, you fear that someone's going to label you something, that's not constructive. Right. And by creating the spaces of being constructive and saying, I don't know my neighbor, and that does make me feel uncomfortable, that is actually creating safe spaces so we can actually have breakthroughs. So I applaud you for creating those spaces. Question?
Can you explain the decision not to hold a sister march to the Power to the Polls event in Las Vegas, actually in DC, and the subsequent reaction to specifically March on Virginia, holding their own march in DC?
Great. And your name?
Claire.
Claire.
Yeah, and we have a really eloquent statement about this on our website that I'm not going to be able to say quite as well as our comms people. But I think Janae can address some of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically what the statement says that Bob is referring to is that the unity principles for us are our guiding light. They are the thing that sets the tone for everything that we do. They are the thing that does not change, does not move. And a lot of people said that they were very radical. It's sort of like our agenda of how we see intersectionality, how we plan to fight through the various issues that women of all kinds are dealing with. And so not every Women's March chapter that had emerged or a state sister march that emerged during the original march bought in fully to those principles. And so you see some Women's March chapters, to Bob's point earlier, where they're inviting people to speak and it looks diverse from the perspective of who's on the program. But when you go into who's actually organizing, who's making decisions, it is not reflective of those unity principles. And that is not something that we as an organization that, has said from the very beginning, this is who we are. And if you want to be with us, this is who you have to be. To really create that space for people to say, okay, this is who we're going to be. And not everyone has done that. And so,
I would just say, and to be clear, well, so there's two questions there, that we can answer. We are very strategic about when we do national actions, where we do them. Like, we were very strategic about the reasons why we chose Detroit, Michigan for our convention and why we chose Washington, D.C. in the first place. Like, that was a really clear decision that we needed to go to where the seat of power was. But in this election cycle, for us, the swing states, and especially states like Nevada that turned blue for the very first time in 2016, states like Nevada that is actually leading in gender parity in the nation. They have half of their congressional representation as women. Okay, states like Nevada, where there are thousands of Salvadorians who are going to be losing their TPS status in September. We want to highlight states like that, and so it was very intentional to kick off our Power to the Polls in a state like Nevada. And it does not mean that Washington, D.C. does not have many systemic problems that we want to continue highlighting. We are continuously doing actions here. I basically lived in the Hart Building in December during the GOP tax scam actions, and we all got arrested multiple times there, fighting for everybody's health care rights. And so many other things. We did actions just today for DACA, and we will never stop fighting for the rights of DC statehood and residents. It's very important to us. But to the question about why not DC, and in regards to the organizers, we also will never stop respecting DC local organizers. Yes. Who often get erased in the process of organizing. And when you don't start something right, we had a very special opportunity with the Women's March that we had some organizers who dug in deep and worked with us, and that is something that we hope people will take the example of. Having had a year to look at the example of the Women's March, for a group to then go and just set a date, start organizing, decide it all without communicating to local DC organizing groups, that is not something we can stand behind. And so we're going to work very hard with groups. We don't give up on people. You know, we're going to work with them. They're very new organizers. And we're going to go through the same education process that we go through with all of our different organizers, and this is a process for all of us. So that's what I would just say to that, is it's a learning process.
And I have to say that the fact that you guys went to Nevada, we were thrilled. We started working in Nevada in 2012, and people told us that we were wasting our time. I'm excited that you guys are going to Texas. We've been in Texas since 2010, and people are saying that we've been wasting our time. Obama lost by 16 points. Hillary lost by 9. So I'll keep wasting my time.
All right, in the interest of time, we will have these final 2 questions.
Hi. So one of the great things for me about the Women's March was, so many women turned out and everybody had different beliefs, and we were all kind of united by these principles and united by the fact that we were there. But kind of after the march ended, all of these complications started coming out and conflicts, both within the feminist movement and within women in general. Even with the Me Too movement now, there's a lot of think pieces coming out about, what is sexual assault? This isn't sexual assault, this is. And so just kind of thinking about how we can come together as women for women's issues, and just, I don't know if there is an answer to that, but if you have it, that'd be great.
And your name, please?
Amber.
Amber. Thank you.
Anyone want to say, what's it?
Mia, do you want to address?
I think that there's an importance in unity, but there's also an importance of having tough discussions. So I think a lot of times we have a tendency, especially white women, have a tendency to say, get in line, stop making a racket, unify. And the question is, unify for what? What are we unifying for? Are we unifying for your beliefs, or are we unifying for beliefs that all people are valuable? So, you know, I don't like when people continuously ask for us to unify. I think it's important to understand the connections between us all and to really hold on to those connections, but to also understand that we have to have these tough discussions, or else we're going to continuously sweep issues underneath the rug and continuously ignore the most vulnerable in the communities. So.
Ditto. The only thing that's, I don't want to say this. For Black women, the women that I engage with, you know, we're in a different place when it comes to the progressive movement. And when you talk about, people say follow Black women or Black women lead, or like, the reality is you have especially generations coming behind my generation, right, really aren't into this to just be in the number when we're carrying the load of what's happening in the progressive movement. And it's not just about Black women turning out so that we can elect more progressives. It's Black women are leading, you know, part of a multi-racial coalition with the women's movement, of course, which is why I said I responded, because of that reality of two sisters that I knew their leadership, I respected their leadership. But there are many, many Black women who are leading. And part of what has to happen in many more spaces, I hear, and I've said it publicly, I'll say it again, Democratic Party, you know, Black women did this, great. So how are you investing in that leadership? Who's making the decisions about where you're going to put those resources? You know, we have some smart, women, we get it all done. But we have to also respect that part of the leadership, that this is a diverse country. What does that mean? We have to make the space and have the hard conversations. But but at the end of the day, I think we haven't had enough hard conversation, right? And really see change at the ballot box in leadership, and being able to see where you investing that, and if you really respect our power and what we bring. And if you don't, what I'm hearing from young people, that's okay. We'll make our sandbox over here, and we'll make a different kind of decision. And that's why you're seeing more and more young folks not identifying with either party. They're going independent. Now, I've lived through politics to know that could be a disaster if you're not strategic about that. But it's also saying that if we want to win again, for those who believe in inclusion, and that this country is built on the backs of its history, we haven't dealt with race in America yet. That's why Donald Trump could win. And so it does take for folks to do what Tamika said. You're going to have to go home and figure that out, and you may not be able to go home. It was hard for me culturally to understand that, right? Like, you had to do a toolkit to go home for Thanksgiving in 2007. I couldn't relate to that.
We
right?
helped them.
I just honestly could not relate to that. And be understanding that culturally we have a lot of difference in that. But at the end of the day, it is about RESPECT, and we're going to demand that moving forward.
And Melanie, I think you hit the nail on the head. What we find oftentimes in campaigns is that they look for the best and brightest of folks in the community as organizers, and they work their heart out, and then they stop. Mm-hmm. They're not then developed to be part of the leadership, and I think that not only gets exhausting, but then it's like, it's a shame because you have so much talent, and that's why they are building other sandboxes, and it's it's intersectional in many ways, and if we don't figure out how to bring them in, they'll always be the ones that basically prevent power development in a real way. That too. Yeah. I'm good with that, but I want to win tomorrow. So how do we actually make those bridges quickly? That's the challenge. I hope that addressed some of your question, because it was deep and I wish we had more time with it. Thank you. Last question.
Hi, my name is Allie. I wanted to just say that I think you're really a model of how to build a movement and an organization that is really inclusive of all the voices at the table that should be there, even down to the point that was just made about local organizers versus national organizers, it feels like you have really thought it through about all of the different types of stakeholders who should be involved in a movement that represents so many people. So I first just want to say thank you for being a model for that, and I'm very impressed. And I'm working right now on building my own organization, and I'm trying to be very mindful of this as I embark on that. But it's also the case that we live in a fairly segregated society, and when especially you're doing something grassroots driven and organic, I think we tend to go to the people we know, and it can be hard to make sure you're finding all the right people who should be at the table. So I'm wondering if you have any advice about how you all found each other. I know you've talked about it some, but if you were starting over from scratch, some ways to make sure you're reaching out to all the people who should be at the table.
Yeah, that is a very good question. The one thing that I've seen that I would do and that works for people like me who was also living a fairly segregated life, even though I'm in New York City, is just put on your Facebook, I would like to hire a Black co-founder for my new organization. Do you know anyone? Hit me up. It really can't do that. I'm sorry. No, I'm a lawyer. I'm just saying don't actually go out and do that because you'll get in trouble. But I understand the point. I really like but that's the trick. Okay, well,
right?
I've definitely done that and it's been okay. But I am not a lawyer, and I would say I would still do it, but the point is that you have to be, when you're in the ideation phase of your organization, you have to make that intention to hire someone who's a co-founder. We really believe in co-leadership at Women's March. Don't make a bunch of strategic decisions about what you want to do if you want it to be inclusive until you've brought someone on. Because what we always, I forget who said it, but if you do something for me without me, you do it to me.
Right. Yeah, I would say I think the way that we sort of came together was that one of our co-organizers, Vanessa Rubel, she noticed okay, we need to get more diversity, and there was thousands of other people, but I think there was some diversity, but I think that it was sort of this conversation, and she happened to reach out to someone who knew Tamika, Michael, who knew Tamika, and then Tamika and Carmen brought in Linda and me, and I think for me, it was I don't want to come sit at the table unless I'm going to be in leadership. I've already been a leader. I've led a civil rights organization. I wasn't coming just to be the local, off to the side person. Not to say that the local is off to the side, but I wanted to be part of the decision making. And then it was the way that I found, Ted, for example. Ted had worked with some people that I knew, and I was okay, have him call me because actually no, Mia was the one. You found Ted, but I also cross-referenced. I also cross-referenced because I was I need to know who this guy is, and he knew some people that I knew. But Mia actually said Ted is the person that we want to have help with logistics to make sure everything's great. Caitlin. I don't even remember. I think Caitlin just sent an email.
I was like Mia. I just bothered everybody.
Yeah, she sent an email, and I happen to know some people who had worked with her, and so I think it's you have to be willing to ask the question. The intentionality matters. So asking the question, maybe not on your Facebook if you're concerned about being sued, but definitely asking friends of friends. Do you know anyone who knows something about X, Y, or Z, and can you put me in touch with that person? I'm looking to diversify my organization. I'm looking to diversify my company, my movement, whatever it is. But I think diversity matters, and I think not saying it, even though you think, oh, if I say it, I'm going to get in trouble. I think not saying it actually hurts more people than just you.
Yeah, no, and just to clarify, that was mostly a joke. I think you absolutely can and should advertise that you want diverse voices at the table. It's more of a just specific hiring qualification where you get into trouble. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I think a real way that you can start diversifying your networks is really showing up to events that are started and run by diverse groups. I think that's the best way, is to establish relationships, because a lot of times what minorities feel like is that people will come up to you and say, hey, can you work on this? And then you get no credit, and you don't get paid, and you don't get anything out of it. And so that's a real thing that you have to face, is that if you don't show up for them, we don't want to show up for you. So it's something that you should make sure that you do, is show up for events that are run by minorities.
And I just wanted to add one thing too that Bob said. She said that at the Women's March within our team we co-lead, and we often have a partner, and the two partners, might be might look completely different. I work in the political strategy stuff that I do with a woman, who's a wonderful, powerful black woman named Natasha Williams, and we don't do anything alone. We are accountable to each other. We talk every morning, we talk every night, and we jokingly said in Vegas this week, and we wonder if we should go to the chapel and get hitched, because of course I'm gay and that might be a problem. But she'll take a call with a partner because I can't make it, but as soon as that call's over, she calls me and reports in. I take a call, she can't make it. As soon as it's over, I call her. We make decisions together. We don't make decisions apart from one another, so it's a true, togetherness, and I highly recommend something like that.
I think that's
all right. I think that. I think that concludes our event, and so let's give a round of applause for the Women's March organizers.